Okay, so very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's been an interesting day since morning. There's been a lot of deliberations around the future of work. People have been talking about different industry. We've also spoken about emerging jobs, emerging learning ecosystems, and so on and so forth. What I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes is actually going to bring in some perspectives about the future of work through the lens of our customers. When I meant customers, I'm talking about industries across the manufacturing. We're talking about architecture. We're talking about engineering, construction. It could be entertainment. It could also be in thinking around product development and so on. But it's important for us to understand what's happening in the industry. What's the disruption that's happening, and then see the kind of influence that it has on the emerging learning ecosystems and patterns in future. So this is the future of work, and as I said, we touched upon the future of making things as well. The person on screen really here does not need any introduction, right? All of you know him. It's Mark Zuckerberg, right? So Mark Zuckerberg once said, we always overestimate what we can do in 2 years. And many a times we underestimate what we can do in a span of 10 years. Now, if you really reflect back this to an industry perspective, the story of innovation never happens all of a sudden. It's not a breakthrough which happens all of a sudden, right? The story of innovation is not something which will happen overnight. It takes its own course, and the best way to explain this would be probably to see this example of what you see on screen. Do people know what is this? It's a Tesla car, right? It's a Model S variant. It's probably what people like to look at and say, hey, awesome car, man. This is probably the car that we want to own, right? Now, as I said, Tesla, this did not happen overnight. It did not happen all of a sudden. The road went through multiple iterations. It went through multiple iterations with improvement in battery technology. It went through improvements in materials. It went through improvements in manufacturing technologies. It went through improvements in sensors, technology, and sheer brilliance as well. And obviously, the blood and sweat and tears of many employees who have actually been behind the scene. But what's interesting to know is this story of innovation is not just about electric cars. It's also about every other industry that we touch upon. It's about the suspension bridges and the stadiums that are being built today. If you're looking at it from a construction standpoint, all these great skyscrapers that you see today, the story remains the same. It's playing across the customer cross-section of the segment that we're talking about. It's about medical devices that are being designed, made. It's been about motorbikes that are being designed, engineered, and made today. All of them, the story is the same. The story plays across all these customers that we're talking about. And this is what our customers interestingly debate today. We call it as the future of making things. And the future of making things is right here. It's not about a vision. It's not a story. It's not a marketing tagline. It's really about real people working with real technology, creating real products which actually impact the real world. It's not a vision or a story anymore. It was a couple of years back. When we spoke about IoT, when we spoke about machine learning, when we spoke about artificial intelligence, VR, AR, MR, all these terms that you heard from morning today, these were supposed to be a vision or a story or something that was a couple of years back. Now, it is a reality. People are using it today across industry sectors. So the future of making is right here. And I will give you some examples for you to relate this better. Let's take an example of, I'm just trying to pick an example of a stadium, because stadiums, the way the stadiums built today are changing dramatically. The stadium that you're seeing on screen is actually a US Bank Stadium, which has recently opened up as a home for the NFL Minnesota Vikings. What's interesting to see about the stadium is, or amazing stuff about the stadium is, it takes about 70,000 people to sit in the stadium. It's got a transparent roof. It's got zinc metal exteriors. And even more, it's got 5 large glass doors in the world, which probably is the only stadium which has the closest field side seats. But what's interesting to know is how technology has transformed the way in which this was manufactured. I wouldn't even say it's built, it's been manufactured. It's about VR. It's about live, softwares like Autodesk Live or VR, virtual reality, which has helped people to actually immerse themselves into the space and experience the stadium even before it's built. It's really about how Murchison was able to simulate how the building was going to be built even before they started off with it. Now imagine, as educators, when I did engineering 20 years back, the way in which we did that is people used to design on papers and obviously use razor blades, to kind of make those changes in design, to scrape it on paper. To what we're talking about is virtual reality really redefining the way in which construction is happening today. You can literally go into and start feeling and immersing yourself into a building even if it's before built. It's radically transforming the way in which people are making buildings anymore. It's not just that. Data proves that this stadium was completed for the first time in the US. You had a stadium built 6 weeks in advance, saving hundreds of millions of dollars. In an industry which is chronically late and over budget, for the first time, Murchison was able to build a building and deliver it 6 weeks earlier, really embracing technology, really embracing the power of technology. And this is similar to the Tesla S moment, a construction which is equivalent to the Tesla S moment. I want to shift gears and talk about some of the other industries that we actually talk to. Let's take manufacturing. It's not just about construction. As I said, it's across the industry cross-section. Let's take manufacturing as an industry. Customers are always focused on innovation. They've always focused on speed to market. They've always focused on quality as three major areas for manufacturers. And this is across people, right? It could be a bunch of guys who are designing a supercar. Or it could be an industrial giant who's into industrial machines. The focus always remains the same. But what's interesting to know now is people have started to recognize and appreciate that the combination of a powerful technology and a collaboration between people is really going to give them that competitive advantage to stay unique away from the pack. And this is important because disruption is happening across the section. I'll try to relate more with an example of the automobile industry. It's always easier to relate to something all of us know. Incidentally, we had an event in Coimbatore, and I had the opportunity to talk to one of the lead designers from the R&D team at Renault. Interestingly, he was a guy who was leading the electric powertrain. So we were discussing about the changes and disruptions happening in the automobile industry. There are three big disruptions happening, and I'm sure all of you know that, right? People talk about autonomous cars. All of you hear that? Right? But are you able to relate to the disruption? It's great to know that we have autonomous cars coming up, right? But imagine in simple terms, from the time that we have driven cars, we're talking about cars that are going to drive by themselves. Is this a joke? Can you imagine this happening in the future? As car makers have always focused on delivering a better driving experience. And now they are challenged to look at delivering a better passenger experience. Right? This is not a joke. The sector is being challenged. The second disruption that people talk about is looking at ride sharing. The Ubers and Olas have redefined it, right? I came in from home today. I just took a Uber and came, and I said, it's not going to make sense for me to drive all the way. It's as simple as that. When you've always paid money to buy access cars, today you're going to pay money to access transportation as a service. There is a big impact on the industry. Governments across the world challenging car makers to look at electric powertrains. We've been used to petrol and diesel all these years, right? And if you read through all the, I just read a couple of, I just read an interesting article on the InShots yesterday, where we're talking about, car manufacturers really saying by 2030 we will have electric powertrains in place. But they've never agreed to replacing the existing powertrains. They're saying we will have them coexist. Interesting, right? These are big challenges that automotive segment is faced with. Let me take an example of a bunch of crazy guys, I would say. They work in building insane cars. So if you take an example, these are called the Bandito brothers. So if you go to the YouTube or Google, just search for Bandito brothers, they really make these insane cars. Okay? So what's interesting to know with them is this is a project that we work with them in terms of integrating a lot of sensors into the chassis. Why should we do that? How is that going to redefine the making process? So when the cars were pushed to their maximum limits, what happened is these sensors actually measure the kind of forces that exist on the chassis and the rest of the parts of the car. What's the outcome? You have tons of data with you. You have tons and tons of data with you, which you're able to refeed into latest technology tools. And what happens in return? When you refeed this data into technology tools, what we've done here is we've pushed it back to a generative design. How many of you know what's generative design? I guess there's quite a few people from the mechanical engineering and civil space here. So we're talking about generative design where we're sharing a goal with the computer. We're sharing a goal with the computer. We're trying to tell a computer, hey, this is what we need as an outcome, and these are the constraints. So if you really see from a job standpoint, how does this impact our emerging workforces? You need to learn to look at technology as a creative partner. You're not going to work with technology as a passive tool anymore, unless you're able to embrace and work with that as a creative partner, which brings in infinite expressibility, which you could have never done in the past. So interestingly, the outcomes is something like this. The outcome which came out of the generative design tools really show a very complex design like this. Now this is supposed to be printed on a chrome alloy. Now we kind of made refinements so that you can print it on titanium. But that's not the interesting point here. The point here that I'm trying to make is just imagine such a complex structure which you could have done through any CAD modeling softwares. You could have never done that in the past. This is something that a human could have never done, but yet it's been done today. It's been done today because you're able to feed in a lot of data back to the machine, simply leveraging in the supercomputing power of the machine, really looking at machine as a creative partner, as a buddy in this whole process. So learning to work with machines and appreciating, embracing technology becomes really critical for the emerging workforce. And what we call is, this is probably a fine example of what we call as machine learning. I guess a lot of people would have probably given examples in the morning, but this is a great example of it. Really powering up the remake cycle. You make, you design, you make and use, and you kind of take powerful insights and then feed that back into the remake cycle, really powering that up through the power of machine learning. And this is a fine example of what we're talking about. We're talking about generative design, we're talking about VR, AR, MR, machine learning, really, really radically transforming the way in which people are going to make things in the future. So what's the urgency? I saw that a lot of people talk about, a lot of skills, important foundational skills. People talking about soft skills, hard skills, mindsets, and so on. So my point of view here, and I'll just take an example of what we found on the net here. It's interesting data, right? While all this is happening in the industry, what we also need to understand is there are a lot of demographic changes that's happening. Really powerful demographic changes. Our customers are really talking about, industries are panicking for a fact. They're panicking because there's large swaths of workforce which is retiring in the near future. There was an interesting article by one of the executive directors of GM where he says the average workforce in his company is about 61, and the average tenure is about 35 years. He's expecting more than 30% of this workforce to retire in the near future. So the challenge which lies across in our industry sectors is really this. You have a whole lot of available jobs, and the gap between these available jobs and the emerging workforce. And as you keep thinking about it, as you keep interacting and deliberating more on this, what's becoming more evident is it's not the lack of worker tool sets. that's fueling this impending crisis. It's also about these underdeveloped mindsets with existing employees, existing workforce, and emerging workforce. And I like the way Chakrabarti put this a couple of minutes back. It's really about those mindsets. How do you embrace technology and learn to coexist with that? It is really about working collaboratively. It's about working collaboratively with high-performance teams. How do you integrate knowledge across the silos that exist? How do you foster and sustain a growth mindset? These are critical skills that have to be embodied when you're a student, when you are in the learning phases. There are great positive news. The Gen Z is about 2.5 billion people. The data is just amazing, right? It's great. There are also positive news. It's positive because industry understands that, education industry understands that there's need for change. And that's evident from all you educators being here today. Thanks for coming in. But also look at the next generation. It's an amazing set of audience. People who really want to make a difference and impact the world. Probably I wasn't that way when I was, probably 20 years back, I wasn't probably thinking about impacting the world. But when I talk to people of this generation, they really mean that. They're adaptable, they're more entrepreneurial. You go to every college and talk to them, what do you want to do? And I know students who really don't want to take up jobs. They come back and say, hey, I'm not going to be an employee anymore. I know I can do better things in life. Right? The students are trying to identify problems. When you go back to schools, and I reflect back this back to our engineering days, the final year project was always a checklist to our academic requirement. But when I go into institutions today, students come back and say, I'm trying to solve a problem. A very interesting statement. Probably I didn't have the guts to do that 20 years back. Interesting. We are talking to a set of a different audience. I'm sure there are exceptions around. But this is what a Gen Z is really looking for. I'm not going to bore you with data. But interestingly, when you reflect this back to education, and I've been an educator myself years back, what's important for us is to really understand and believe it's not going to help if you're going to build this youth with specific skills and believe that that's going to take them for a lifetime. It's not going to happen. It's really about building that mindset of learning. It's really about building that curious doer that Chakrabarti was talking about in the morning. It's really, really important. And if I build this back and reflecting back on what we spoke all this while, really talking about the future of making across industry and the future of learning as educators, which is what your area is all about, it's no different. It's no different. And I'd love to iterate this again and again. If you're talking about, okay, probably I didn't learn how to do this. Okay, so if you're talking about distributed collaboration, where we said industry looks at people collaborating and working together, multidisciplinary collaboration. It's not going to be any different in the academia world. You need to look at distributed learning. If you're going to learn the same, it's not going to work. If you're talking about generative design in machines, we're talking about mind prosthetics and learning. If you're going to talk about project-based, projects over discipline, it's all about project-based learning. There is no difference. It's important that we understand this and try to reflect this back to our education system. And I'm sure many of you are doing this. So I leave you with this note. The future of making is very closely threaded to the future of learning. And I'll be available for the course of the day to answer any questions if you have. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, once again.